Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we will finish up our 32-team preview series with the Seattle Seahawks. And thank you everyone for checking these out along the way. Very proud to have gotten through all 32, tried to make them as evergreen as possible along the way. So if you haven't caught all of them, feel free to go back before we have real life football back on Thursday. I can't wait. I know you guys can't wait too, but before we get on to that, the Seattle Seahawks fantasy football team preview. Russell Wilson. Team let Russ cook right here. Obviously, Seattle, they want to run the hell out of the ball anytime they can. And it's really been that way his entire career. And so unfortunate. I mean, I don't think people realize just quite how amazing Wilson has been throughout his career. I mean, all right, there's been 158 QBs to start at least 50 games over the past 50 years. Among that group, here Russ ranks in various statistics. Passing touchdown rate, he's first. QB rating, second. Completion rate, 11th. Interception rate, 6th. Yards per attempt, 4th. Adjusted yards per attempt, 2nd. Rushing yards per game, 4th. Now, pass attempts per start, 104th. I understand the thought process behind, okay, you watch how Russ plays, him running around. He's a smaller guy. You want to keep him healthy. You don't want to consistently expose this guys to hits behind an offensive line that usually hasn't been all that great. But Russ has never missed a game due to injury since he entered the damn league. So I don't know. He's ranked 38th and 30th in pass attempts in 2018, 2019. It's been just worse underneath Brian Schottenheimer. It sucks. I mean, you watch the throws he makes. The ball placement's unbelievable. He's so slippery in the pocket. And, you know, he's been going out himself throughout this offseason just talking about, hey, you know, every time we go in 2-minute mode or every time we have comeback mode in the fourth quarter, we move the ball up and down the field. Why don't we do this earlier in the game? And it's a great question. It's too bad that they don't let him do it. And, you know, maybe he's benefiting a little bit from, you know, always being in the comeback mode and prevent defenses. I did look at some of his, you know, games where he is throwing the ball a lot, and, you know, he has been a little bit less efficient when he is chucking the ball all over the place. But, you know, like, less efficient for Russ is still, you know, one of the more efficient QBs in the entire league. So and honestly now, like, my even bigger gripe isn't just the pass attempt volume. That's always been an issue, but they're not even using him as a dual threat QB anymore. And again, this is the NFL's, among QBs that have started 50 games, number 4 all-time quarterback in rushing yards per game. I mean, Russ Wilson, the things he really did early on in his career as a runner were wild, and he's not like he's slow now. He's still plenty capable. He had 7 total yards on designed runs last year. 7. He averaged 151 rushing yards on design runs from 2012 to 2018. Russ still picked up a good amount of rushing yards last year. The only difference was he had to do it himself, scrambling, because he always has to do it himself. So, you know, he's never been anything other than fantasy QB1 despite this lack of passing volume. I don't expect that to change in 2020. Still have him firmly in the QB1 range, but, you know, like, there's guys I'm taking ahead of him. I just don't know how much longer Russ can provide this historically elite efficiency. He's got the weapons to do it, and he could be the overall QB1 if they just really let him cook for once, but just too much run game volume that doesn't involve Russ for me to, you know, be reaching on him in any of these fantasy drafts. Looking at the backfield, seems like the Chris Carson show, but I'm not super sure. He's not a guy I've necessarily faded this offseason, but I'm also a little hesitant in chasing him with a top 3 round pick. I mean, here's the issue. If you look at last season, Carson was the guy, but he had 2 separate games where he was benched because of fumbles that just kept happening. I mean, he had 7 fumbles on the year, and he had 2 separate 3-game stretches of fumbling each time. So after a while, they did get tired of it, and when Rashad Penny came back later in the season, he was actually splitting snaps and touches right down the middle with Carson. And then Penny got hurt again, and Carson was the guy again, and then he got hurt, and then we had the whole Marshawn Lynch thing. So a lot of moving pieces going on there, but one of our most recent split of healthy backs being there in Seattle was Carson and pretty much a 2-back committee. So I had an article go up this last week about my favorite kind of targets outside of the top 150, and it sounds ugly, people. Like, just hear me out though. Carlos Hyde is a guy who they brought in. not to take Carson's job, but to take Penny's job. Now, when Penny is hurt, which he is right now, he's on the pup, looking like he's going to miss at least the first 6 games of the season. And if Hyde is there to be the guy that Penny was in the last part of the year, this could be a situation we look back after week 1 and we go, wow, Hyde's actually almost splitting things right down the middle with Chris Carson. Hyde's going to be on top of all those waiver wire ads because guess what? He's only like 1 or 2, probably more Chris Carson fumbles away, or just a brief stint of ineffectiveness from having a chance to take over yet another backfield. I mean, if there's one thing that, veteran, just kind of old school coaches love, it's seemingly giving Carlos Hyde a ton of touches. So, look, I don't like it. I wouldn't do it. If it was up to me, Duke Johnson would have, put Carlos Hyde in, firmly on the bench years ago, but it's not up to me. It's up to Brian Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll, and they're going to run the ball. And if it's between Carson and Hyde, okay, then Hyde might have some standalone value there. If it's not, okay, then Hyde could very well take over if Carson has any more fumbling issues or just gets off to a slow start. So I think DJ Dallas, their 4th round pick, will steal some pass down work away from these guys. But this is a situation where they run the ball enough that 2 guys could feasibly be flirting with 15 rushing attempts on a weekly basis. So really keep an eye out in week 1. And, maybe Carson keeps the job and gets going. He's a great running back, and when he holds on to the damn ball, which obviously is a big part of it, but just in terms of broken tackles, and he even took a step forward in the pass game last year. So, there's definitely a scenario where Carson is just the lead guy and he has another successful season, but really wouldn't discount the chances for, Hyde and then later a healthy Penny to make this more of a 2-back committee. So do not be afraid to throw, a late 16th, 17th round pick at Mr. Carlos Hyde. Moving on to the wide receivers, DK Metcalf out wide, Tyler Lockett in the slot, and then we're going to have, Phillip Dorsett, Josh Gordon now, pending suspension potentially, and maybe David Moore if he makes the roster, splitting time at that number 3 spot. I hope Josh Gordon goes out and crushes it, but I don't think this is the right spot for him fantasy-wise at all. He wasn't washed last season. I mean, he caught a freaking bomb from Russ Wilson. It must have been like a 60-yard catch, and that ball was in the air that far as well. That was a great play during his brief time with the Seahawks. And in New England, I mean, he wasn't separating a bunch, but still averaging a bunch of yards per reception, and target. Still being efficient when given the chances. Just didn't get a bunch of chances, and he's not going to get that in Seattle in this run-first offense behind Metcalf and Lockett. I think 50% of the passing game is going to go through Metcalf and Lockett, and while I have Metcalf as a slight leader moving forward here, I do think that's a situation that could easily swing Lockett's way. People, including myself, I think are still kind of bitter about that Week 13 last year where Lockett unfortunately laid a goose egg in the round before a lot of people had to get going in fantasy, and for him to only go for 7 catches and 170 yards and no scores from weeks 10 to 14 was brutal. But he was a top 3 wide receiver before that slow stretch that was impacted by injuries, and he finished the season off 8 catches, 120 yards, touchdown, 6 catches, 51 yards in his score, 9 catches, 136 yards in his score. That was in 3 of his final 5 games of the year, so we saw that strong upside right there again. We know the Jedi-like chemistry with Russell Wilson remains there, and again, he's the offense's number 2 pass game option at worst. It's not like there's another high-end guy taking away run, but I just think Metcalf, his rise is going to be here, and I think he's going to be a number 1 guy in Seattle before too long. Look, it took Doug Baldwin 4 years to get at least 100 targets from Russell Wilson. It took Lockett 5 years. Metcalf did so as a rookie, and the way he was coming on at the end of the year, last 3 games, 6 catches, 81 yards, touchdown, 8 catches, 160 yards, touchdown, 4 catches, 59 yards in the final game of the season. Look, the dude expand the route tree as the year went on. Mostly he was just stationary at the left wide receiver spot, but started to even use him around there. And just the amount of pressure he puts on defense with both his size and his speed. He's the type of freaky talent I want to bet on. And, as the fun saying goes, better in best ball. But this is a situation where if you can really prioritize the Seahawks passing game in best ball, I think that'd be great because they are kind of built on these super fancy friendly opportunities that lend themselves, nicely, getting all these deep balls and red zone targets, lend themselves nicely to some true blow-up performances. So definitely down to prioritize Metcalf and Lockett. Best ball drafts of all shapes and size. Of course, if you are doing best ball, do it with the fine folks at Underdog Fantasy. Use code PFF, free entry into the Millie Maker. And hey, if you get that Russ Metcalf Lockett stack, they decide to let Russ cook for once, who knows? Maybe you take down that Millie Maker and remember who sent you there. So moving on to tight end group, this one won't take too long. I mean, if it was one of Greg Olsen, Will Dissly, or even Jacob Hollister to just be the Seahawks tight end one, I think they would be amazing. And it's kind of the same thing like Deshaun Watson. Like, give Russ Wilson or Deshaun Watson just a talented full-time tight end. I think they're going to put up huge numbers, but together in this trio, no, I don't think so. I mean, Will Dissly, whenever he's been out there in his short career, the guy's just putting up massive numbers, so he's going to stay involved. Olsen, again, like Witten going to Vegas, like I don't think Olsen would have gone to Seattle if he didn't have some sort of guarantee of playing time. I also don't think it's going to be, 80, 90% snaps plus, but it's going to be enough to cause an issue with his potential fantasy upside. So, you add potentially Hollister into the mix. I am fading the Seattle Seahawks tight ends until we get an injury or two to help clear things out. So, on to the ranks. I have Russell Wilson as my QB7, one spot behind Josh Allen, one spot ahead of Carson Wentz. I mean, if it was just what QB do you want in the league, I asked this on Twitter, and I said if the aliens invade the earth, we got to play them in a football game to try to save humanity, and Patrick Mahomes is sick, who's going to be our quarterback? And, the public, and myself included, pick Russell Wilson. Unfortunately, the Seattle Seahawks coaching staff doesn't quite agree with that in terms of, letting him let it rip in terms of pass game volume, which we've talked enough about. So that's why Russ is a little bit lower for me than others, but obviously he has that overall QB1 upside any given year. Running back, I have Chris Carson as my running back 18, one spot behind David Johnson, one spot ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I think his path to success is pretty clear. I mean, look, even if Hyde and Penny are more involved than we think, Carson can still get the job done on a 50-60% snap share. We know he's talented, and if he holds on the ball, which it wasn't a huge issue in the first 2 years of his career, can definitely see him, getting back in that RB1 range. I just think, David Johnson, James Conner, even Melvin Gordon, I think these guys have bigger roles, more pass game friendly roles, and I'm going to be rolling the dice more on them than Carson. I just got a bad feeling that we're going to see too much Hyde, and if Penny's healthy, a good amount of him as well. Moving on, wide receiver, I have Metcalf as my wide receiver 23, one spot behind Courtland Sutton, one spot ahead of Cooper Kupp. And I have Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 25, one spot behind Kupp, one spot ahead of Will Fuller. They could be right next to each other. I want all of them. And, 4.3 teammates per season, finish among the top 24 PPR wide receivers together. I definitely think the Seahawks are in position to do that in 2020. Tight end, I'm not really. I have Olsen as my tight end 28, one spot behind Dawson Knox, one spot ahead of Darren Fells. Look, if week one rolls around and Olsen is playing 90% snaps and Russ feeds him 8 targets, we'll adjust the new information. But right now, certainly seems like they are going to be spreading out those targets. And they got 3 guys to do it. So moving on to the win total, got the 49ers at 10.5, the Seahawks and Rams are at 9, and we have the Arizona Cardinals sitting at 7.5. Honestly, like I said, it's in the Rams pod. I think it should be way more clear distinction between the Seahawks and the Rams. You look at the Seahawks, I would take the Seahawks. Crap. I guess not having Clowney hurts them. Adding Jamal Adams helps, but if they just had one, real high-level defensive lineman in there to help soothe things over, I feel a little more confident about the defense. So I won't say their defense is necessarily a lot better than the Rams, but I think the offense at this point, you're taking Russ over Goff 8 days of the week, and, even the big liability that used to be the Seahawks offensive line, they might be better. I think they probably are better than the Rams offensive line at this point in time, and, wide receiver talent, running back talent. I think a lot of these are going to the Seahawks, and even if you want to dispute some of that, I think the gap between Russ and Goff is big enough to, look at this 9-win total and just say, what the hell? And it's kind of why I'm betting on the Texans win total over 7.5. I know Seahawks is a little bit higher, but, when you're Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, any of these top 5 QBs, putting a win total anywhere around that 500 mark, I will be taking the over. So I do have Seahawks over 9. Wouldn't be surprised in the least if they're able to capture the NFC West, may make some noise in the playoffs. So thank you all for listening. I'm Ian Hartitz. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you check us out during the season. We will have shows out on Tuesday and Thursday going over all things throughout the week and everything you need to be a successful fantasy football player, along with some game reviews shortly after the Monday night, Sunday night, and Thursday night games are over. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.